All right, let's go through the chapter 1 test that I gave and some of you need to work on. First of all, this is kind of small to see, so I'm going to draw the picture here. We have a graph that has the point A at 3, 2, and B is at 1, 6. So, if we go from A to B, which is kind of typical, the x goes from 3 to 1. The x goes from 3 to 1, which is down 2, back 2, I should say. And if we do go from A to B, the y goes from a height of 2 to a height of 6, which is plus 4. You could also say 6 minus 2 is 4, and 1 minus 3 is negative 2. That's what you would do in the slope formulas. y2 minus y1, and x2 minus x1. Those are the change x and y. Most people did pretty well here. Now it says determine the length. And the formula for the length is it's the Pythagorean Theorem on this picture. The change in x squared plus the change in y squared equals the distance squared. So the distance is equal to the change in x squared plus the change in y squared, square root of all that. Well, some of you wrote negative 2 squared but typed it in your calculator and said, okay, it says the calculator says negative 4, but negative 2 squared, negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. We add those, we get 20. And that's the distance between them. Then it says determine the midpoint. That's halfway between, so it's got to be the average of the x's. So you take the 3 and the 1, the x's, 3 plus 1 and divide by 2. And that will be the x-coordinate of the midpoint. And the y-coordinate is the average height. It goes from 2 to 6, so, excuse me, 2 plus 6, excuse me, divided by 2. Now 3 plus 1 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. 2 plus 6 is 8, divided by 2 is 4. Then we're supposed to find C if B is the midpoint. So if A is at 3, 2, 3, 2, and B is here, and B is the midpoint, C must be back there further. That's back 2 up 4, back 2 more and up 4 more. Or we can go 3, 2, 1, 6, and then keep going in that direction. So this went down 2, so down 2 more. 3, 2, 1, that's down 2. So down 2 more would be negative 1. And this goes from 2 to 6, so that's up 4. So if we go up 4 more, that's 10. So negative 1, 10. Back from 3 to 1, and then back 2 more is minus 1. We went from 2 to 6, that's up 4. So up 4 more would be up at 10. Determine the slope. That's just change in y over change in x. That's 4 divided by negative 2, which is negative 2. Determine the equation of a line through A and B. Well, in this form, y equals m, the slope, minus 2 times x, plus some number that makes this work, b, the y-intercept. So if I use the first point, 3 for x and 2 for y, I get 2 equals Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6 plus b. If I'm trying to figure out b, I would add 6 to both sides. And I get b equals 8. But I didn't ask what b is, I asked what the equation is, so you have to finish writing the equation. So that would be y equals negative 2x, and b is 8. Now it says use the other point. The other point that we were given, we found other points on the line, the midpoint and that line, but the other point that was given was 1, 6. So I expected you to put the 6 in for the y, replace the y in y minus 2x plus 8, replace the y with 6, replace the x with 1, and see what we get. So we get 6, and we're checking, so we're trying to see if this is truly equal. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 8. Negative 2 plus 8 is 6. So that seems to check. Now it says use this method of finding an equation of line. And it says change in y times the x variable minus the change in x times the y variable is always the same number. All right, the change in y up here was 4. So we get 4x minus, the change in x was minus 2, so minus a minus 2 is plus 2. Y is supposed to equal some number that we're going to try to figure out. And now I'll use the first point, which was 3 in the x and 2 in the y, to see if I can figure this number out. 4 times 3 is 12. 2 times 2 is 4. 12 plus 4 is 16. There's the equation. Notice I'm writing it with the x and y's in it. Now I'm supposed to check it with the other point, which means I'm supposed to put the 1 in for the x and it's 2 times y, and I'm supposed to put 6 in for the y, and this should also come out to be 16. We're checking to see if it does. So this is 4 plus 12, which is 16. So it checks. You're showing your work. Then it says change this equation to look like the answer in 6. Change the 8's answer to be 6's. So, taking 4x plus 2y equals 16 and solving for y, because that's what it is, y equals. So I'll subtract 4x from both sides. Negative 4x plus 16. I've subtracted 4x from both sides. 4x is gone. We've got negative 4x on the other side. Divide everything by 2. Divide both sides by 2, and so I get y equals negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2x plus 16 divided by 2 is plus 8. That matches. Now we're supposed to use this other method, which says y minus y from one of the points equals the slope times x minus x from one of the points. So if I use the slope, which is minus 2, leave the y, but replace the y from one of the points with, let's just use the first point. Y was 2. And x minus x from one of the points, and where y was 2, x was 3, so minus 3. And there's the equation. That's it. check your answer using the other point. The other point was 1 for x and 6 for y. So we'd have 6 minus 2 on the left side. On the right side, we're trying to check and make sure that these are equal. We'd have a minus 2, and we're replacing the x with a 1, times 1 minus 3. 6 minus 2 is 4. 1 minus 3 is negative 2, times negative 2 is also 4, so it checks. Take the equation that we have in 11 and make it equal to the answer in 6. So we need to solve for y and come up with minus 2x. So I'm going to show my work. I have y minus 2 equals negative 2 times x minus 3. I'm going to multiply the negative 2 through, so I get y minus 2 equals minus 2x plus 6. And the only thing over with the y is the minus 2, so I'm going to go plus 2 to both sides. And I get y equals minus 2x plus 8, which is what it said in number 6. Determine equation line parallel to AB through 2, 1. Well, I could go back and use this one. Y equals negative 2x. That has to stay the same to be the parallel, the y and the 2x. It just needs a new b. And if I put 2 in for the x and 1 in for the y, I get y equals negative 4 plus b. 1 equals negative 4 plus b. And if I add 4, I get b equals 5. And so I'd have to put a 5 there. If I chose to do it with the second equation, the change in y and change in x are here, and those determine the slope. That has to stay the same. So I could just say 4x plus 2y just has to be a new number. So this would have been good enough, but I could also do it with here. Putting 2 in for the x and 1 in for the y, I get 8 plus 2, which is 10. And that would have been fine for a parallel line. I could have used this last method. Instead of going through minus 2, minus 3, or from 2, 3, it's got to go through 2, 1. So I would just say y minus 2 equals the slope minus 2 times x minus, y was 1 here. Y minus 1 equals minus 2 times x minus 2. There we go. And that's all you would have to do for that one. So this one or that one's pretty easy. This is probably the hardest. Now to do perpendicular. The slope changes. Instead of the original slope, which was minus 2 or minus 2 over 1, the slope for a perpendicular is, the original slope has to be flipped over, the reciprocal, and change its sign. So it's minus, so we change it to plus, and change it from 2 over 1 to 1 over 2. So we could put in 1/2 in place of the m and do this method. We could do, that's the change in y, so we go 1x minus 2y and figure out the constant, or we can do the third method. I'll just do the y, well, I'll see how many I can do here. Y equals 1/2 x plus something. If I put in the 1 in for the x, I get 1/2 times 1, which is 1/2, plus something is supposed to equal, and it says it's supposed to come out to be 2. Well, a half plus 1.5 is 2. That's that method. This is the second method. We need to know what the change in x and y are, and so this says a change in y is 1 and change in x is 2. So if I want to do the second method, it's going to be change in y times x, so that's 1x, minus change in x is 2, minus 2 times y equals some number. I put the 1 in for the x and the 2 in for the y, and I get 1 minus 4, which is negative 3. And that would have been the answer doing that method. And the last method, I would do y minus the y coordinate, 2, equals m, 1/2, we decided it has to be, times x minus the x coordinate. And that's that method. Now the last problem. It says use b. b was 1/6. So I'm going to draw a picture of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's right there. And we're supposed to be 5 from that. So it doesn't reach here. It's about that long, which means it's going to hit somewhere here and somewhere up here, this circle that's radius 5 around B. There's 2 places. B had the coordinates of 1, 6, and if we're on the y-axis like it said, the x-coordinate is 0, and it's up or down some number we'll call y. And the distance between these two had to be 5. So, the distance formula says it's the square root of the change in x squared plus the change in the y squared. Well, the difference in the x's from 0 to 1 is 1. The difference in the y's, well, that's 6 and y, and the difference we find by subtracting. So I can write 6 minus y or y minus 6. I'm going to do y minus 6 squared, and we're supposed to add these. And that's supposed to be the distance between them, or 5. So to solve for y, I'm going to get rid of the square root by squaring both sides. I get 25 equals, the square root's now gone because I squared. 1 squared is 1 plus y minus 6 squared. Now I could multiply that out, but that would be a lot harder than to just keep solving. So there's this plus 1, so I'm going to subtract 1, and I get 24 equals y minus 6 squared. So to get rid of the square, I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and when I take the square root of both sides, I get plus or minus the square root of 24 equals, the square root of this is y minus 6. If it's y minus 6, I have to add 6 to both sides, and I get 6 plus or minus the square root of 24 is what y can be. That means there's 2 places, which we knew there were 2 places on here, but I asked for the points, so you have to give me coordinates of points. The x coordinates were always 0. 0, and then 6 plus the square root of 24 is one of the points. The other one is also 0, but it is 6 minus the square root of 24. And some of you reduce the square root of 24. 24 is 4 times 6, so the square root of 24 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 6 doesn't simplify, and so you could have had 6 plus 2 square roots of 6 and 6 minus 2 square roots of 6. And that's the first page.